What is half rose, half human, half Godzilla, and 150% badass? It's Biollante. Let's give this kaiju a spec evil reimagining. Look at that, everyone! A new intro! Huge thanks to my brother Andres for making it. Now, Biollante is an artificially created kaiju from 1989 movie Godzilla vs. Biollante, one of the coolest and scariest opponents Godzilla has faced. So now we're going to give a spec evil reimagining not just to the creature, but her whole story. Please consider smashing those like, hype and subscribe buttons, or watch more kaiju videos. And now, without further ado, let's get started. While nuclear technology has had many positive impacts in medicine, energy production and science, the consequences of its improper use are not exactly unknown. And while nuclear weapons are in themselves terrible, improper management of radioactive waste can have a much more subtle, insidious effect on the world around it. After the Godzilla incidents, many science researchers around the world began studying the inherent resistance to radiation presented in many species related to this phenomenon, as well as its potential positive applications. One of these studies was led by Dr. Genichiro Shiragami, a scientist who had been previously renowned for his work on plant genetics. He only changed his line of research after the passing of his daughter Erika, from what we now understand to have been cancer caused by exposure to improperly disposed of industrial radioactive wastes. Dr. Shiragami kept a cell line derived from his daughter, which he intended to use in conjunction with other experimental assets to determine ways to protect humanity from radiation in the future. These experimental assets included tissue samples obtained from a similarly irradiated Godzilla heisei, a relative of a species we've talked about in the past, and Dr. Shiragami utilized comparative cytology and genetic manipulation technologies to determine how the properties that allowed greater resistance to radiation in Godzilla could be implemented in human cells. Once promising initial results were obtained from his research, Dr. Shiragami's team expanded their inquiries towards the application of similar mechanisms on crops and economically important plants, utilizing the same rose cultivar lines he had worked with in the past. Alas, we can only dream of what such studies would have yielded. After all, anything that calls attention to bad practices by industries and corporations tends to attract attention of its own. And soon after news broke out of these advancements, an explosion destroyed Dr. Shiragami's laboratory the 16th of December, 1989. While it was at first ruled a freak accident, eventually we'd learn this was an intentional attack by an undercover hit group sent by Biollante, an industrial conglomerate responsible for the aforementioned radioactive waste. This attack was, unfortunately, successful. Dr. Shiragami and many of his staff lost their lives during the explosion, and most of his research and materials were destroyed. All expected the hybrid cell lines created by Dr. Shiragami had died as well, but as we would come to learn, that was not the case. In the wreckage of the laboratory, the hybrid cell line termed ANEBR89 kept growing and developing. Given its nature as a modified line intended for constant experimentation, Line R89 was modified to present accelerated cellular growth, and so increased in size constantly, feeding on the leftover substrate, then on the rest of the experimental cell lines, then anything organic left in the lab, until it grew enough for its root-like extensions to reach the outside of the laboratory. The entity growing from this cell line, nicknamed Biollante after a Norse plant spirit, kept growing undetected after the laboratory's remains were abandoned, being found, as they were, in isolation, away from any urban centers. The cell growth allowed this entity not only to increase in size, but to resist any disease by simply growing faster than illness could damage it. This growth, while constant, was extremely disorganized, leading to a form that resembled less the structured form of a plant and more the chaotic development of a teratoma. Other alterations induced in some of the original rose lines utilized were expressed in this conglomerate, including the production of highly acidic compounds intended to deter predation, as well as the production of excessive secondary metabolites which, paired with the constant death and decay of Biollante's mass, created a fertile soil that greatly favored the growth not only of the hybrid itself, but of all plants in the area. This plant growth would eventually lead to new surveys finding the creature in its then current state. Biollante had grown to an incredible size, over 20 meters in height, partially aided by its tissues forming fleshy scaffoldings across nearby trees. It was mostly sessile, its growth having expressed a much greater percentage of plant genes over its animal components. While its structure mostly retained the disorganized growth that characterized it, some distinct elements were observable in the organism's anatomy. Multitudes of thorns covered the exposed parts of Biollante's tissues. Thick, tendril-like structures erupted at random intervals from its mass, reaching for the ground below, anatomically appearing to be a mix of roots and stalks. Most dramatically, however, was the enormous flower that had formed atop it. It was as chaotic as the rest of its anatomy, but the presence of concentrically arranged rings of petals was undeniable. Similar petal-like structures, smaller, less developed and much less organized, grew sparsely across Biollante. Unfortunately, study of this organism would have to be hastily stopped once an escaped Godzilla succus entered the area where Biollante was growing and attacked the hybrid organism seemingly without provocation. We suspect that Godzilla succus detected signs of radiation or human smell coming off of the organism, which would have aroused a violent response in an organism previously held by humans and utilized for radiation research much like that Dr. Shiragami had conducted. Whatever the case, this Godzilla succus used its pressurized vapor to heavily damage Biollante before leaving. As a response to this attack, Biollante entered an emergency regeneration process, developing a secondary phenotype as the animal DNA forming part of the hybrid expressed itself, perhaps as the radiation found in the reptile's body activated the radiation-resistant genes from the hybrid's genetic makeup. Great amounts of muscle tissue grew among the plant-like fibers of the organism, allowing for a limited but marked degree of movement through its anatomy. Slowly, the organism regrew its lost tissue. The flowering structure in its body had been destroyed, and was replaced with a gaping maw full of thorns as the hybrid organism attempted to take on a form similar to that of a Godzilla succus, just as its genetic programming determined. Similar structures developed across its tendrils, giving them an edge in gripping the terrain around it. This regenerated organism soon began using its newly formed muscle tissue to move. It moved slowly, ungainly, using its tendrils to grab onto trees and terrain alike before growing and dragging its mass along the ground. And yet, still it moved, covering terrain day by day, finding more nutrients and water that allowed it to grow further as it did. Eventually, the Godzilla succus, which had made its territory in the greater region where Biollante had formed and was currently moving in, met with the hybrid creature once again. At this point, it became clear Biollante's alterations had further advanced along the physiological blueprint of its animal genes, as upon first sensing the hostile creature, it immediately began ejecting large amounts of the aforementioned acidic substance through a mechanism that mimicked the same organs used by the Godzilla succus to use its breath weapon, with analogs being found in the main body of the hybrid and many of its tendrils. As for the damage this caused to Biollante's tissues, it is unlikely it was of much concern to the hybrid, as they would have regenerated in time and, as far as we know, proper pain response and sensitivity was rather limited. In conjunction with the thorns covering its body and its prehensile tendrils, the hybrid caused grievous damage to the Godzilla succus, but this form would turn out not to be sustainable. As the battle raged on, harm done by the reptile and its radioactive vapor was more than the hybrid could resist, and little by little its mass began breaking down until any movement stopped altogether. Rather than regenerating once more, it seems cell activity stopped entirely, and eventually all of its biomass was determined to be neutralized. Spores were recovered from the area afterwards, and while these were determined to be inviable in situ, the entire area is still being monitored by our organization and a few others, hoping no further growth of this creature will happen. As for the Godzilla succus itself, it was sadly captured and put down a few years later, a response to the damage caused through no fault of its own. In the end, neither of these amazing organisms was truly a monster. The real monsters are those whose actions led to their creation. And that's it for Speculative Biology Look into Biollante, with a guest appearance by Heisei Godzilla. It's been a while since we last made a Godzilla, hasn't it? With this episode being based on an artificial organism, I really wanted to give it a much more lore/story focused direction, looking less at the biology of the organism itself and a little more at the scientific background and logic behind it, since in real life and unlike in movies, scientists aren't really allowed to do whatever they want with their research for no reason whatsoever. Trust me, I know. Of course, this didn't mean I wouldn't give a go at giving our speculative Biollante a retouch, reinforcing the unnatural hybridization of the creature over just designing a cool looking monster. Which, yeah, the original design is mwah. Fixing it was not the aim, but making something fun and based on biological principles. Of a sort. So I hope y'all had fun with this one, and let me know if there are other man-made kaiju or stories you'd like to see get this treatment in the future. As always, here's a thank you to everyone who wanted to see this episode, which was really fun to work on. And also, thank you to our researchers and research associates who support us through Patreon and YouTube memberships, with special thanks to our new member, Ultron Awesome. Remember, you too can join in if you want to support our channel, and you get some nice perks too, like seeing all of our creatures and videos ahead of time and helping mold them into shape. Or you can also like, subscribe, or write a comment telling me any type of creature you'd like me to give the Spec-Evo treatment in the show. Any of those really help the channel a lot. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time on the Speculative Wildlife Research Center.